clanky valves today. Hello, everybody. So we do have a couple of previously asked questions. So let's get on those quickly. This is from Sean, and it's sort of a follow-up from last week. All right, so Sean says, last week you spoke about thinking. This should actually say not thinking. Last week you spoke about not thinking these other trumpet players have something that we can never attain. And then he puts in parentheses, worshiping them. Do you feel that anyone can attain playing like any famous player? If we study, put in the time, etc., we can attain that level too. Yes, but you know what? It's not. I think this worship thing is more dug into our understanding than we think. Okay? Because when I say, if I answer yes, and I'm going to answer yes, the official answer is yes. I do believe every one of us can attain that. Do we attain it? Red pill awake. You can, but when you get there, will it have been fun? so yes, you see, hello Seppo, nice to see you. You see, to me, if we try to be just like one of those players, there's two problems with that. One is that that's not jazz. And I know there's people that get upset when you say this is jazz, this is not jazz. But hear me out on this, right? The spirit of jazz, and when I say spirit, I don't mean like what we would say in the church. I mean where we have the letter of the law, the spirit of the law. I'm talking about spirit in that sense. Okay, the spirit of jazz is such that you're supposed to find your own voice. You're supposed to do your own thing, but it's supposed to be your voice, your thing within a certain parameter. Now, that parameter is actually quite loose, but it does need to be within a parameter. There has to be something that connects us. In my opinion, that something is the language. If you lose the language, you've lost the jazz. That's for me as a jazz performer, a jazz educator, and a jazz theorist. That's my take on that, is that the language is, and this is just as true for all sorts of music. It's the language that separates out the styles. And this is true for all types of music. My cat has brought in a lizard and trying to hunt it down. Anyway, so if I look distracted, I'm trying to make sure she doesn't tear up all my papers. I shouldn't be putting papers on the floor. Anyway, but yes, so can we achieve that? What's the word he says there? Playing like, can we attain playing like any famous player? Yes, we can. Is it going to sound just like Freddie Hubbard? Is it going to sound just like Clifford Brown? Is it going to sound just like Wynton Marsalis? Is it going to sound just like Woody Shaw? Well, I hope not. Does that make sense? I hope not. So, so you know, in jazz, you're not going to tell you. I remember, and I was a little bit embarrassed. I went, I went to go visit Dennis Dotson back when he used to live in a different place where he lives now, and he used to have a very nice garage apartment in the back of somebody's house, right? And and I went in there and I visited him, and he said that he used to do some of those duo concerts with what's his name? Oh, what's the guy's name? Bobby Shue. He used to do those duo concerts with Bobby Shue, maybe one or two of them. I don't remember how many he said. And I was like, wow, that's great. I didn't know that. I was very impressed. And he said, hey, um, you know, he's the one that showed me. He says the difference between him and Bobby Shue, it's not a stratification difference. Now he didn't use that word, but that's how we tend to think like that. We tend to think like that in terms of stratification. Who's better than who? Like a single line of skill, whatever, right? The truth is that's not how music works, that's not how jazz works. So he pointed out to me, because at that time I was still thinking linearly like that. And I thought in my head, Bobby Shue was this greater, higher on the lineage, and certainly I recognized that Dennis Dotson was much better than me. So, but I figured somewhere above Dennis was Bobby Shue, and Dennis helped me understand that that's not how it works. And the truth is, I've been studying Dennis's playing. I have probably transcribed more Dennis Dotson solos than any other person I've ever transcribed. I have literally dozens of Dennis Dotson transcriptions that I wrote. But also, I probably have transcribed more Dennis Dotson solos than anybody else in the world. So I have a very familiar um, understanding of Dennis's playing. And now I understand even more today what he was trying to say back then than I did back then. It was a revelation to me back then. Now I have an even greater understanding. There is no way. I want to lay this out. There is no way Bobby Shue could ever play like Dennis Dotson. It's not possible. Dennis Dotson has a whole lifetime behind what he does, and it makes him so unique and so beautiful. I hate to use that kind of word because then it makes it sound like you're putting other people down. But you get my point, right? Hello, Karen. Nice to see you. Um, so when we say, can someone attain that level? Yes, you can attain that level. You can easily attain that level. Will people like it? That's something else, right? That's why one of the things I like to say is that you have to like it. My wife, she says, I like it, and I represent a percentage of the population. she, so, um, so in other words, what she's saying is, if you like it, then someone else is going to like it too. Okay. You know what I find interesting is that the most successful musicians are not even liked by even half of the people. Hello, Jeffrey. The most successful, let this sink in. You don't have to win over everybody. You don't even have to win over half of everybody. So let's say we're talking about trumpet players, right? Let's say there's an artist. How many trumpet players have to like what you do for you to become successful? Is it 50%? Is it 30%? The truth is, that percentage, I don't know the exact percentage, but it's less than half. The truth is, you don't have to have everybody like what you do. The most important thing is that you like what you do. And see, that's where the hero worship comes in to play, because if you are hero worshiping, you will never like what you do, because you will always think that you are falling short. You know, the one way that you can know whether this is happening. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Well, that hasn't happened in a long time. Here on this chat, I mean. All right. Now, he has another question. He says, also, can you expound on why you can't have written sound for Zuti's technique and Hubbard's harmonic control? Some of the things contradict each other. I just don't know what that means. Well, what I was talking about when I said that, what happens in your mouth to get that kind of technique is the opposite of what happens in your mouth to get that kind of sound. Okay, what happens on it, the kind of equipment you get makes a difference. A lot of things in music, you have to choose one or the other, or try to find something down the middle. But down the middle, you will never get those extremes. Down the middle, you will never get Wynton Marsalis's sound. Down the middle, you will never have Alan Vazuti's technique. Okay? So, yes, physically, what has to happen for those things to happen physically is different. You can't have both. Now, it can sound like to other people that you have both. That's because they're not listening at the level you're listening at. So you can say, "Oh, that guy has all of this, all of that, and all of that." But you know what? If you ask them personally, they'll say that no, they're not there. And you know what? As much as I love Alan Mazzucchi's playing, I've said this before. It's not so. If I just say it about him, it makes it sound like I'm talking badly about him, and um, nobody should ever think that I'm saying anything like that. I like Alan Mazzucchi's playing. Okay. Um, I've said the first time I ever said what I'm about to say, it was for Maynard Ferguson. You know, I got to hear Maynard live, I think 5 or 6 times, maybe more than that. and I loved his show. I loved his band. This was back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s. What an amazing show. And what an amazing band. And he's an amazing was an amazing trumpet player. And I love if he was still alive and he had a concert here in town, I would go hear him. But I tell people all the time, I would never want to play like that. And it's just like what I said. If you guys remember when I was talking about, I think I was talking on one of these Q and A's about restaurants. I think I was talking on these. It might have been something else. But it's the same thing. People get offended. People are easily offended, right? People get offended if you say something like that. To me, it's like a very logical thing to say. In fact, it should be flattering. And it's sort of like what I was saying last time about the hero worship, right? Because there are people that hero worship Maynard. And if you say, oh, I like his playing, but I would never want to play like that. There's people in the hero worship category that will hate you for something like that, hate you for saying something like that. So, yes, I love Alan Vizuti's playing. I love to listen to him. I think he was probably the first trumpet player that I was on my radar to play both classical and jazz music. So I had a lot of admiration for him. Now those players there's a lot of people that do that now. So anyway, Seppo asks, do you teach your students in standing or sitting position or both? I guess I would have to say almost everybody takes their lessons sitting down. I really never really thought about it because, personally, I haven't sat down to practice in decades. It's been since the early 90s since I sat down. Um, and yeah, so and that's part of the reason why why I struggle right now. I'm still not ready to play a lot of the gigs yet because this health thing that I'm working my way through, I don't practice sitting down, and well, not most, but a lot of my gigs that I was playing are sit down gigs, and the breathing for that is entirely because of the health stuff. I'm not going to go into what health stuff I'm talking about, but the breathing is part of my problem. It's like I have to relearn how to breathe all over again. And because I don't practice sitting down, I'm not so sure I can do a sit down gig right now, if that makes any sense. I guess talking about it out loud makes me realize I need to do something about that. But no, we don't really talk about that much. I will tell them that when they're practicing, they should be practicing standing up. I do say that. What they do during the lesson, really, most of them sit down. But you know what? Part of that right now, part of that is because it's internet lessons, and I want them to be in a position that they can be that works with the camera and all of that. So yeah, I'm actually I'm actually a little bit embarrassed because I don't have a thing for the standing or sitting. Um, yeah, I'm not real strict about stuff like that either. You know, I had a student. Let me tell you about this, right? Because this is exactly, you could say this is part of my teaching technique. I had a student that started with me when he was, I think, first grade. He might have been kindergarten. I don't think so, though. I think he was first grade. And so the trumpet was so big that he would sit on the chair with his feet up on the chair. The image I have in my head, because he started lessons here, right? And then he moved and he kept taking lessons online. But he had lessons here, sat on the chair with his legs up, his feet up on the chair, and the trumpet resting either on one of his legs or but he was like almost in fetal position playing the trumpet. And he, for a long, long time, he had what we would call bad posture. And I did not do anything to correct that. And you could, a lot of people would say, well, that's bad teaching. That's just bad teaching. Right? Well, let's talk about this kid today. So today, as a seventh grader, no, I'm sorry, eighth grader, he's an eighth grader. He's got a gig with a big band that meets every Monday night. He's the second chair in this adult big band. He gets all the jazz solos. It's funny to look at the section because it's like adult, little kid. And he's the one playing all the solos with an adult band. Not only that, he's also in the local community orchestra. Second chair in the local community orchestra. Adults, not children, not the youth symphony. He's second chair in the adult orchestra. Not only that, he plays in the local adult brass quintet. This guy's an eighth grader. He went to a jazz camp last year in San Francisco. He went to a jazz camp. And you know how at a camp, they'll place you, right? They'll place you according to your playing. So they make a video at the end of the camp with the kids, performing a solo, performing with a combo. And once again, he's got guys that look like they're in college. The trombone player looks like he's in college. The sax player looks like he's in college. And here you have this little seventh grader playing at their level. That's the same kid that had no posture when he was in first grade. I don't think that fixing his posture at that age would have done anything to make him better. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So yes, but you know what? Part of the reason why I'm like that is because I teach the individual. I don't teach a class. So I don't have a responsibility to multiple students in that lesson. I don't have a responsibility to a band director. I don't have the responsibility to a band program. I am a completely independent teacher. My job is to help that student get where? To where that student wants to go. So the student I'm talking about now, it has accomplished those things that only because that's what he wanted to accomplish. Not because some band director was forcing him into it, not because there was some musical standard that was thrust upon him. At every step of the way in his development, we only accomplished the goals that he wanted to accomplish. You know, I like to call this the commercial, what's the word that the business people use? A business model, right? The commercial private lesson business model is that the student is a customer. That's the way I teach. The student is a customer. We're going to go where the student wants to go. I think this is why my lessons have been so successful. I'm not trying to make anybody do anything. I'm trying to help them get where they want to go. And you know, if you have a first grader, first grade, what is that, like 6 years old? 6 years old, 7 years old? And you treat that first grader as a customer. The customer is not thinking, oh, I want to be second chair in the community orchestra when I'm 8th grade. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking, I want to have fun playing this piece of metal. Now, I should clarify. I don't just do things to and make them fun. I think them having fun is yeah, I shouldn't have said it that way. I really don't like the word fun. I don't know if I've told you guys about that. I really don't like fun. Really, really, really. I don't think things should be fun. They should be rewarding. They should be uplifting. They can bring us pleasure, stuff like that. The word fun is like the lowest level of gratification that we can have. Sean says, when I said playing like them, famous trumpet players, I should have said on the same level. Maybe that's a better word. But so see, when you say same level, what does that even mean? You know, right before I started teaching today, I went and listened to about 5 videos of a trumpet player I had never heard of because he's going to be in town. I didn't look at the date that'll be in town, but he's going to be in town, and I've never heard of him, so I thought maybe I should check this guy out. And he's one of those guys that's got lots of technique, lots of range. I would have to listen more to say whether or not I like it or not. I don't easily make a decision like that. But right now I'm leaning towards I don't like it a lot. But it's just for me, it's more of a personality thing. I don't like the in-your-face kind of playing. But what I was thinking was, what's the difference between him and I? Now, I do know that there are probably more people that would like his playing more than they like my playing. I do know that. And I do know that people that can only think linearly, people who can only think one line of stratification, they would say that guy's better than me. Okay? They would probably say he's better than Dennis Dotson. They would probably say he's better than a lot of people that I really, really like. Why? Because he can play high, he can play fast. He plays a lot of weird intervals and stuff like that. Okay? Does that make him better? So to me, most of what I heard today, and you can't judge people just by a few performances because they might have had a bad day or whatever, you know. But most of what I heard today didn't sound. I like the word that my wife uses. She says that resonates with me. So what I heard today didn't resonate with me. So how do you, when you look at what makes someone at quote unquote that level, are we just talking about technique? Are we just talking about skill? I mean, and if we're not just talking about that stuff, how do you measure that? I want to bring this back up again. Let me look this up. I think it's Isaac and Nora. Isaac, or is it Andrea? Nope, that's the wrong one. Isaac, and Nora. I thought it was Nora. Look up on YouTube. I've shared this with you guys before. I'm going to put a link. It's a family. The girl sings, the boy plays trumpet. He plays other instruments too. But when I first started listening to them years ago, in terms of technique, the boy wasn't much better than my intermediate students. So think about that. He wasn't that much better than my intermediate students. And yet, his playing was so endearing to me. People, I think most people watch those videos because of the cute little girl singing, right? For me, I was always fascinated with the trumpet player. His older videos, he's got a few cracked notes, and it's hard for him to get around on the horn. Now it's not. Now he's like, because it's like, what, 10 years later or something. And, he's, playing at a much higher skill level. But, my point is, how do you stratify that? How do you say that he's less of a trumpet player because he can't play faster, or he can't play high, or he doesn't have the perfect sound or any of that stuff? What makes him, to me, I don't see it that way. I see that little kid as being right up there with the rest of us. And by the way, I do see myself, and people will think this is arrogant, Um, the way I see it, right? Bobby Shue, and by the way, I played with Bobby Shue, I guess, about 6 times. And Dennis Dotson, if Bobby Shue and Dennis Dotson are at the words that you're using at that level, at the same level, then you can pretty much say, I think, the same thing about me and Dennis. We're just very different players. And I'm not trying to I don't say stuff like this to get attention or to build myself up and say, oh, I'm so good or anything like that. So I hope that makes sense. You know, you have, I think it comes down to finding your voice. And that's why I'm so fascinated with Isaac. Because Isaac found his voice when he was only like 8 years old. I could listen to him. I could listen to Isaac's videos 10 years ago. I don't know if it was 10 years ago, but it seemed like 10 years. I can listen to that and say, yes, this is right. This is right. This sounds like what it's supposed to sound like. You listen to Dennis Dotson and you say, yes, this is right. You listen to Bobby Shue, you say, yes, this is right. You have to find your voice. You have to find what makes you, you. And it doesn't take, you don't have to, you know, it's sort of like Christianity, right? You don't have to work to get it. Now, I do think in music, just as it is with Christianity, you have an obligation to improve. But it's not the improvement that gives you the grace. It's not the improvement that gives you salvation. It's not the improvement that earns mercy for you. You work, you improve yourself because of the mercy, because of the grace, because of the salvation. I mean, how can you be delivered and not feel that obligation to do better? Right? Same thing with the music. With the music, you know, so I think I found my voice about 20 years ago. It was late in life. And that's part of the reason why, right? Because, you know, even though I don't think I was as hardcore of a music worshiper as some people, I still had elements of that. I still haven't figured a lot of this stuff out. And where my head was is what was keeping me back. And it took me a lot longer to get to find my voice than it should have. Seppo says that leveling you were talking about sounds to me is just almost as impossible as going to our curriculums. I would say metering the instrument playing skill is impossible, especially with children. The only thing that weighs is what we can do and what possible to do with them. Yeah, so, you know, Hello, Greg. So yeah, you know, all of this stuff, I think, I think a lot of this stuff is very offensive to a lot of people, especially if they are deeply caught up in their own subculture with the, like the academic stuff and stuff like that. I think being outside of any kind of institution has really given me a very different perspective on all this stuff. Greg says you give yourself an honest effort when practicing, or otherwise you honestly practice. Practice pays off. There you go. All right. Any other questions? I hope I answered. When we're doing this stuff, because sometimes I go the long way around in my answers. If you feel like I haven't actually answered the question, always feel free to follow up here or in an email later or whatever. Oh, I skipped a question. Sorry, Karen. Karen says, why should we practice standing up? Because of the posture, mostly. So when we sit down, we have a tendency to scrunch all this up. When we stand up, the abdomen has to be more flattened out. So you get, I wish I had a better answer for it than that. But that's what it is to me. It's the posture. Now, I've not been a real big, that kind of contradicts what I've told you in the past, right? On the surface, it seems to contradict what I said because I told you I've always slouched. But when I say that, I'm talking about the shoulders. I'm not talking about down here. So when you stand up, this has to be flat. You don't, I don't know. I can't even imagine playing in a way that standing up, you could scrunch this all up. Now, when you're sitting down, in theory, you should be sitting like on the edge of the seat with the same posture as you have standing up. So, instead of like this, you should be playing on the edge of your seat like that. That's how you should really be. Okay? Now, I have an overbite. And very much like the stories I hear about now, I don't know this to be true. I'm telling you what the stories I heard were that Hig Chickowitz, when he was in the Chicago Symphony, the story I heard was that because he points the trumpet down, right, just like me, and then the conductor said, raise your bill, and Chickowitz says, I can't do that, I've got an overbite, or something along those lines. And the conductor says, before he starts back up again, says something about get your teeth fixed or something like that. It's a famous trumpet story. Once again, I don't know how true it was. But because of this and the slouching that I always had, I've always played like this. See this? So when I play sitting down, I hope you can still hear me. When I play sitting down, even if I'm on the edge, I always played like this, right? Not like this. So the horn is still pointing down, but I always used to play more like this. That's what I meant by slouching. Oh, and what I was going to tell you is that on the lead gigs, because I can't get my horn up without screwing up my playing, the lead gigs, I always had my back straight. I got to show you guys this, right? I hope you can see this. I always had to play with my back straight, but leaning back into the back of the chair and pointing up that way. That was the only way I could get my horn up above the trombone players. So if I had to play lead on a big band gig, that's how I always sat. Straight back, so I wasn't slouching like that. Straight back, leaning back into the chair. That way I could get the horn up without screwing up the angle I was doing. Greg Ellis says, just dropped by to say hello, signing off. Keep up the great teachings. Well, thank you. Seppo says, do you have a piece of advice how to teach to make the lip aperture smaller? Yeah, I don't know. How do you know if the aperture is smaller? How do you check? How do you know when you're working with a student that the aperture is too big? Is it just by sound? Or do you have a visualizer? How do you do that? So to me, in my lessons, I would rather talk about aperture control. And in fact, you know what? I haven't started an email to you yet, but that last email you sent with the link that had the recital for your young students. I watched all the trumpet players, and I do have some comments that I'd like to share with you. And one of the things I was going to share with you, and I will still in the email, is this thing about aperture control. You know, if we teach aperture control the way I like to teach it, you don't have to know if it's smaller or bigger. The student will just subconsciously and automatically adjust in the way that needs to be adjusted. What do we do for aperture control? Mostly lip bends and pedal tones. Now the pedal tones, we do two different kinds of pedal tones. The ones that you use the same fingering are the ones that give you better aperture control. So if you play F first valve, now if they do a pedal tone like that, the objective is to hold the pitch as steady as possible, get it as in tune, as close to in tune as possible, get the best sound as possible. Okay, same thing. and just keep going down half steps, that gives you the control over the aperture. Same thing with lip bends. We want that lip bend to go down a half step and stay stable. Get the best sound you can get on it, which is not going to be a good sound, but strive to get the best sound you can. And now there's more to it than just that. There's more to it than just that. Oh, Seppo says, that is my guess because they are struggling with the upper register. I do not use visualizer regularly. All right, I get it. So let me show you. And my students get too much of this. Right? I start sometimes with the when I want to show this graph, I'll say, "Did I ever show you this graph?" And a lot of times I'll say, "Yes, you showed me," and I'll still show them anyway. My Sharpies are all gone. Okay. It's gonna have to be red, sorry. So let me first show you what I think most people struggle with when it comes to the upper register. And when I say upper register, I know what you're talking about is what for us, whatever upper register is the top notes that we can't get. Right? So we assume if we have a graph and this axis we're going to say is the range. Is that right? I get this mixed up sometimes. Yes, range. So low notes, high notes, and then we're going to put effort on this side. Effort slash movement. I want to call it movement because it's not just the aperture. That's another thing we need to be very careful about. It's not just the aperture. If all you change is the aperture, you're opening a big can of worms, and you're asking for other problems to happen. Okay? Because you'll make it out of balance. We don't want to be out of balance. Okay, so let me show you the chart. These are the low notes to the high notes. This is effort slash movement. We assume that relationship is linear, that it looks something like this. We think that it looks like this, that the higher you go, the more effort or movement you have to put. This is not true. That's not how the trumpet works. It's more like this. And it tends to stabilize at the top. Okay? All right? So, what does that mean? A lot of times, when people get higher, everything that they do breaks down because they're either overshooting it or not getting to it at all. And that's not You know, it's not something that we can fix by saying do this or do that, do this or do that. What we can do is fix the environment that encourages that. Okay? So, for example, yes, I still maintain that aperture control is important. I still think aperture control is important. So you want to do the lip bends, you want to do the pedal tones. Okay? But the problem is that it's impossible to relate to them in spoken words. What has to change here? It is impossible. You cannot tell them how to do that. It cannot be explained to them. So that's why, one of the very first articles I ever wrote was called Range Familiarity. And we want to just spend more time not in the upper. See, this is where it gets tricky. If you cross the line, if you practice too high, you don't get any benefit. There's these people that want to push the envelope. I remember having a student one time that he understood my method, but he enjoyed the high notes so much he just wanted to try, see if he's got that range yet. It's called impatience. So and he let himself do this on a daily basis to try to see how high he could go. And the problem is, once we pass that threshold, the mechanics of how we play changes, and you're not getting any benefit. If we look at it in terms of familiarity, so there's no answer to the high note problem that's better than familiarity. What people are always looking for is a shortcut. And some of the shortcuts work to give you high notes, but it sounds terrible. And by the way, those shortcuts only work for certain people. They will not work for everybody because what's holding different people back is different stuff. There is no one size fits all. Familiarity applies to everybody. Familiarity works for everyone. But once you pass that threshold where you have to do something radically different here, once you pass that threshold, you're not getting any familiarity benefit because how you're playing is radically different from the way you play the other notes. That's why I call my one range book One Range. So there are movements that we do over the register, right? Now I did have to move stuff around, but it wasn't radically different to get up into the upper register. Okay. Yeah, so you can say that I have one range. So that time I think I played up to G above high C. one range from G above high C and higher down to the pedal tones. I don't have any weird adjustments between. Why is that? Because when I developed my upper register, it used to make people so angry because I would say, quote, this is an exact quote, I got my range by never practicing high. Made them angry. The high note guys hate this. I'm going to say it again. In fact, I'll type it in the chat. I got my range by never practicing high. Oh, makes the high note guys very, very angry. Why? What do I mean when I say that? Because most people would say that's not possible. Well, it's about as possible as never running a marathon before you go to the race. You look up the people who run marathons, the people who train for that. They don't ever run a marathon on their training. The day they first run a marathon is when they get to the marathon. And sometimes our heads can't wrap ourselves around that. Okay? We think we have to play high to get high. And I'm talking about notes. We think we have to play high notes to get high notes. But if they are notes that you think are high, then they're all probably too high. And you're doing something different to get them. So what I did, and the way I teach, is you find out where that threshold is, and you only practice up to there. But you practice everything up to there. Your long tones should go up to there. Your scales should go up to there. Your lip slurs should go up to there. Never one note past that. Never. Not to try it, not to have fun, not to push yourself and see how far you can go. Only up to that level and stop. Now, this is what the familiarity thing is all about. If you do everything that you do up to that note, you will become familiar with that range. And then one day you find out. Now, my students ask, how do I know when I'm ready to move on to the next level if I never try those notes? Well, because in the process of practicing up to that note, there will be days when you accidentally overshoot. And so let's say your note is G above the staff. And every day you take your long tones up to G, you take your scales up to G, you take your slurs up to G, you take articulation up to G, you take multiple tongue up to G. Your etudes go up to G. Your solo that you play with the piano is up to G. Everything you do is up to G. You're going to crack notes. You're going to have notes that came out different from what you were trying for. And what happens a lot of times is someone will go, they'll think they're playing G, C, G, C, E, and they start too high and they end up on a B flat. Right? I had a student do that today. He was going for the G, a B flat above it came out. He didn't know. He didn't know it was a B flat. And because he didn't know it was a high note, he played it with the kind of, familiarity that he would have played on a G. And what's ironic about that student today is that when he went down to the next note, which was supposed to be higher than that, it was supposed to be an A, he was struggling to get the A. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was playing a B flat confidently, subconsciously. He didn't know he's on a B flat. He struggled to get the A. It's all in your head, right? All in your head. But that's how I know when someone's ready to go on. That's one of the signs. Another sign is that they don't get tired on that routine. That practicing at that range, practicing up to G, hypothetically, practicing up to G never makes them tired. Now we know they're more than ready to move on to the next level. But we don't figure it out by testing it and saying, oh, let's see how high you can play now. Maybe you're ready. No, we don't do that. I shouldn't say we don't. There have been a few times when I've still done that, but it was normally with a student I don't know very well. And I'm just trying to figure out where we are. Jeffrey asked what kind of horn that is. That's my Quanon. I did some homework to find out. I think this is a pre-fire Quanon. Apparently the Quanon factory burnt down. This is before the factory burned down. So it's a great horn. All right, guys. Maybe we have time for one more question. Any other questions? I want to thank you again for hanging out. All right, so we do have a few weeks coming up. Seppo says, thanks for the great answer. You're welcome. We do have a few times coming up where we won't have this. I'm thinking about taking next week off because it is Easter. I don't know. We'll see. And then there's a birthday party I have to go to for somebody at church. I shouldn't say it like that. Makes it sound like I don't want to go, but I do want to go. And then I have an out-of-town gig. So those are all coming up over the next 6 weeks. So we might not have this as often. Sean says, when I pull the second valve slide out, it doesn't pop. Is that bad? No compression. This is on my Quanon. I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about that, especially if it's that same horn you showed me. Right? I just wouldn't worry about it. All right, guys. Well, God bless you. And we'll see you next time. Have a great week.